it sounds to me like your criticism is more about D'Angelo herself than anything else. And so like, do you believe that white fragility actually exists as a concept? Because it sounded to me like you were criticizing her blanket usage of it rather
As
than
she
actually the
defines it,
concept.
as she defines it, I would say that white fragility is a made up concept.
You don't think that there are white people, a significant number of white people, who, when you try to bring up or have conversations about race, they get upset and agitated and, have a visceral reaction to that? Because in my
Uh,
experience of having conversations with white people about race, I've seen it to the point where people have a physiological reaction.
yeah,
So,
I mean, certainly there's going to be people who are, and numerous people, who are going to have strong opinions, and
I mean, that's all.
you
I
know,
mean, that's all it is. That's all she.
and
Even your definition that you attributed to her was about people's reaction.
to me, it's
Um,
about so to me, what she calls white fragility, uh, to the extent that it has bearing on reality, is essentially psychological defense mechanisms that are very commonplace in human nature and would have a greater probability of arising in matters that are very sensitive, such as conversations about race. And so, I guess the point ultimately is it's just not surprising to me, um, and that you would observe the same type of psychological animation, animation, if you will, uh, uh, back in say '04 and '05 about the Iraq War and people who, staunchly defended the global war on terror and those who don't, and any other very very sensitive issue.
yeah, but the
Um,
distinction is that we're talking about people's identities,
yeah, of
and
course. I mean, it's a
right.
different issue, but it's the
Well,
same.
it's a different level. It's a different dimension of the reaction that you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not
I know
convinced.
you don't know, but I happen to know because I've been having these conversations for decades. So like,
Yep.
so that's why I happen to know through my
Well,
experience. But
I would say that my sister is um, she has spent her career in social justice activism, critical race theory, um, all of that. And
hmm
so I can say that we've had many, many animated conversations over the years.
hmm
Um, and uh, they have sometimes veered into the impolite and so on. Um, and, you know, I don't know that I would describe myself as exhibiting white fragility, um, as much as, well, one, disagreeing with any particular point she was making, perhaps misunderstanding a point. In fact, subsequent relations, I remember sitting in a restaurant with her one time, and I think I said a particular waitress looked cute or something, and she said, or the girl, or I think I said that girl, and she said, "Why do you call her a girl? Why not a woman? Would you say a boy instead of a man or whatever?" And you know, um, I didn't have too strong a reaction to that. At first, I was inclined to dismiss it, but then I ended up writing an article for the Good Men Project about, um, you know, being unaware of using sexist language. Now, I've subsequently reevaluated that, and I somehow wonder whether I was in fact using sexist language. But this is the quote unquote word I don't like, the dialectic that you can have about this stuff. So yeah, I mean, I am not at all surprised that white people are going to be difficult to talk to, but I think that's true of everybody, and I'm not surprised by it. And I think we'd have to flesh out what it means to be difficult to talk to.
all right, I'm very unsatisfied with that answer, but
I'm
okay.
not surprised.
I mean, because it sounds like it sounds mostly like you're just trying to avoid
I
acknowledgement.
no, I think it really depends on the contingencies of every situation, and I think
Of course it
generalizing,
does. Nobody
yeah,
nobody would argue with that. I don't think that that is that is not the argument. Like the point is that there is some unique. Okay, I know you don't agree with that, but it exists. I there's, of course, it would be very difficult to prove, but like it's observable.
Well, let's just think about just how I ended up getting into D'Angelo. I sent an article to my sister, and I said it was about possibility that you would observe confirmation bias in social justice activism. You know, and her response to that was the immediate response. I'll always remember it was, "Why do you get so defensive when talking about white privilege?" Or, "Why are you being so fragile?" Now, keep in mind, it wasn't really an article about white privilege, but every time I attempted to come back with a, in good faith engagement about what it is I was actually trying to say, she was just saying, "You're being fragile. Why are you being so fragile?" And that's really what got me started on D'Angelo. And I think that that is the reaction that many people observe when white fragility comes up. And I think that is what needs to be criticized. If we're going to say, if somebody's going to raise a concern, just a very simple concern, maybe there's some confirmation bias at times in the attribution of sexism or racism or whatever to some particular phenomenon. And you're not allowed to make your case that maybe it's not sexism in this particular case or not racism in this
But
particular
where are
case.
you getting that? Where are you getting that you're not allowed to make the case? What do you mean?
The anecdote that I just described to you with my sister, there was no engagement there. It was, "You're just being fragile." All I did was send an article about potential confirmation bias in social justice activism. I don't think she read the article. I don't think she didn't engage any of the points that I was making. It was just, "You're being fragile." And I think in practice, that's how it functions often, at
Hmm.
least in my experience. And I think a lot of people would say it functions in their experience as well.
How in your experience, like with your sister alone, or is there more?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of thinking or talking fast, so getting ahead of my thoughts, I'd have to think of some examples. I can probably go back to, uh, you know, uh, maybe, but the one that's coming to mind right now is the paper by Sue and his colleagues on microaggressions, and I kind of go through that in chapter 9. Um, and this actually illustrates where I think the tension really is. He's on an airplane and he's with his black colleague, and three white guys get in front of him and sit down, and then it's just as the attendant is. Have you read it? Am I reiterating this? Have you read this
No, go
yet?
ahead for our
Well,
audience as well.
so the flight attendant, closes the overall compartments, and then it's a small hopper from New York to Boston, and so she comes over to Sue and his colleague and asks them if they would, you know, go to the back of the plane to even out the weight of the plane because it's a small plane. Something I've witnessed myself, going to West Virginia, I was asked to go to the back of the plane to even out the weight. Anyway, they had a very negative reaction to that. They said, these guys just sat in front of me and we're in our comfortable seats and why, so they essentially interpreted this as a racial slight or whatever. That it was because they were Asian and black that they asked them to go. And as you would expect, the flight attendant was horrified and disagreed and, like reverted to all the old, um, I don't see color and all that. And so in the book, I kind of just run through how this is obviously a very sensitive situation, and you can have, different interpretations. And the impact of what she said seems to have been harmful to Sue and his colleague. And, those insensitivities arise every day, and we have to acknowledge them. At the same time, you know, we also have to acknowledge that the flight attendant may very well not had any racial uh, uh, tone to that. It might have simply been that they sat behind, that they were behind the guys in front of them, so they just happened to be closer to the back of the plane, and it just thoughtlessly asked them instead of the guys that sat down. Both of these are possibilities, And she may very well have been right that, you know, I mean, it might have that there was no racial implication here. So on one level, the important point is it's impossible to determine.
But
Um,
this is exactly I think this is the point, right? Which is
yeah,
that it's about whether you can determine that or not, right? And
yeah,
then
I agree.
you have to understand that everyone doesn't have the same ability to perceive the difference, right? Like people have different abilities to perceive
Oh yeah,
whether something has is racially motivated or not. And this is part of the problem because people who regularly experience oppression learn how to differentiate a lot better than people for whom it's something that's more of an externality.
now
Okay, now hang on, let me finish. Okay, now that's not to say that just because they may be able to perceive a little bit better, that they can't still make a mistake. You know, it happens all the time, right? It happens all the time, for sure, 100%. That people believe there was some kind of racial animus or racial undertone or something, and there was none. There was nothing there, right? It happened to me like not even that long ago. And but for me, the reason I know that it happened to me is because I investigated it, right? And I knew to investigate it. So, like, I think that you're right, right? Like, I have no argument with what you were saying about the fact that it's hard to distinguish, right? But it's not the equal difficulty for everyone to distinguish. That's not true either.
Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long, unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support and see you next time.